Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's 5:30 in the morning here. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It's a little bit early for me today. I'm actually having to switch my schedule around, but this is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and we're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and we'll be on for half an hour. The chat room is open, and I'm going to pop the link in there to what I wanted to finish looking at here today, and that's post-abuse vulnerabilities from www.mentalhealth.net. And we're just going to finish up this article, and it's quite interesting. I like what Catherine Patricelli had to say there, and I hope you will go check that website out. There's lots of good info on there regarding abuse, child abuse, domestic violence, survivor, issues and stuff. It's really quite interesting, and so that's what we're going to be doing this morning. And thanks for being here. I appreciate everybody who's tuning in. It's early, I know. I like doing my 6 o'clock shows a little bit better, but I'm going to have to switch them in the morning to 5:30, and so that's all right. It's a little bit early, but that's okay. And so I'm not a counselor or therapist. I don't hold any certificates in those areas, and I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own blog talk shows, right? So you have to listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about all the issues surrounding abuse, domestic violence, and it can be quite stressful for people to listen to. It's not. Some people are very sensitive to the topics of abuse, right? And so you have to make sure that you're okay to listen to it, right? If it's something that you feel might bother you, then you have to do the right thing, and you have to turn it off, right? So it's clearly your discretion. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show, and that's because I believe in protecting children at all times, and especially when there's a chat room present, you really should know how to keep yourself safe, and and know how to protect yourself when you're online, right? So it's just so important. So type into your browser if you need to, internet safety for children, online safety, and that will bring up websites with lots of good info on there on how to keep yourself safe. So I just lost all of my stuff. I'm gonna have to go back into all of my my switchboard and everything and get my links and whatnot. But Catherine Patricelli was just talking about the fact that post-abuse vulnerabilities, that not everybody would experience all this stuff, but there are certain, things that are not really, they're called subclinical. They're not really considered to be like a disorder. Like, for instance, being diagnosed bipolar or being diagnosed DID, dissociative disorder and whatnot. Some people who have been abused, not everyone, but some people who have been abused actually suffer from a lot of stuff that's actually not really labeled as a clinical issue. It's just problems in their life, and so we were looking at that and really going through that yesterday, talking about the fact that some people are, have eating disorders, and some may experience things like suicidal thoughts, and just not being able to continue on in lasting relationships and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's kind of what we were going through. And hello, Gypsy Witch. I've got my good friend from Australia here, and glad you could be here. It's awesome. Yeah, I just lost all of my stuff. I had to go back into all of my programs on the internet here for some reason. I don't know why, but I've got it all going here now. So I'm going to pop the link into there to what we were talking about here in just a sec. And so, not everyone will suffer with that stuff, but some people do. And you don't even have to be abused just to, have problems with some of that stuff, eating disorders and trust issues and everything else like that. It doesn't necessarily mean you've been abused just because you have an eating disorder or you have suicidal thoughts or tendencies. It could be brought on by other things, you know what I mean? So it doesn't necessarily mean that a person's been abused, right? So it's important to remember that and keep that in mind. I know that most websites will actually say that. The websites that I do my research on usually do indicate that, because that's the truth. So it's good to know that. And but some people do suffer with this stuff, and that's the whole issue. It's pretty harsh. So I'm just going to bring up this, if I can find this link here, back to where we were. And it's taking me a second here to find it, and I don't know why. It should still be here. Here we go. Okay, so I want to finish looking at this, and then we're actually going to sort of move on from here. There is one more article on this website that was pretty interesting, and that's why do adults stay in abusive relationships. So it's not necessarily dealing with child abuse, but it is taking a look at why people do stay in abusive relationships, right? And so I think that we might read through that one, and then we'll move on from this website. But, I mean, there's everything on here. There's information about domestic settings of abuse, institutional settings of abuse, all kinds of stuff. Everything, recognizing abuse, effects of abuse. And we've already gone through a lot of this stuff over the last few weeks. We've been sort of looking at this website, right? If you and your children are currently experiencing abuse, there's articles on here about all kinds of stuff like that. So be sure and take a look through there and see what's there mentalhelp.net, www.mentalhelp.net. And this particular article is called Post-Abuse Vulnerabilities, and from Catherine Pacicelli. So I'm going to pop this into the chat room again for anybody who would like to catch this. And Gypsy Witch, you might have seen this yesterday, so you probably, or maybe even the day before, because you've been here pretty much through the whole thing. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Catching almost all of my shows. You're really. I have a good friend in Australia, Gypsy Witch, and she catches almost all of my shows, and she's here for me like all the time, and not just on this show, but in my life, you know. And I appreciate it because she's a dear friend of mine who I just love dearly. So there you go. There's the link, and post-abuse vulnerabilities. So we're just going to pick up right where I left off. So sorry about this, people. I'm just having a little bit of trouble with my computer. It froze, and then I had to actually end all my programs in order to get back in here. So sorry. It is taking me a few minutes. So, you know, abuse is normal. So she says, you know, people abused as children often grow up thinking that abuse is normal, you know, just because that's the experiences that they've had, right? And they said this warped perspective makes abuse victims vulnerable to perpetuating the cycle of abuse as they grow older, right? If they don't recognize that those behaviors are abusive, you know, they can continue that stuff on, which is what I was doing for a long time, until I realized, you know, that wasn't right. You know what I mean? Different behaviors that I didn't recognize in myself were actually pointed out to me by different people. And, you know, it's just normal for me. So I just thought that's the way we deal with things, right? And then found out that no, clearly it's, you know, abusive behavior. And my sweetheart, who I'm still with now, 15 years later, when we were first together, I mean, some of the behaviors I was, you know, displaying towards him were all of this learned behavior that I had learned from my parents, right? So, you know, I just carried it on into my adult life, even though I had really been working on myself for years and years and years. I was still doing some of the things that my parents had shown me how to do, which was to be, you know, semi-violent and abusive, and, you know, the type of person that would be like, I'll hurt you before you hurt me in a relationship, right? And possibly that's just self-preservation or whatever, but I hadn't learned how to handle things properly. So it was pointed out to me, you know, that my behaviors were abusive. So I thought, well, man, it's so true. All I'm doing is what my mom showed me how to do. And that's that whole cycle of abuse, right? So many people don't even realize that they have that stuff. And then she was talking about this, you know, the post-abuse issues that are subclinical, which are not sufficient to meet criteria for a disorder. And that's where we left off. So we were talking about difficulty developing or sustaining healthy relationships, long-term intimate relationships, sexual dysfunction, discomfort with sexual intimacy, low self-esteem can be an issue, a tendency towards self-blame can be a problem, difficulty expressing anger appropriately, right? A tendency to put everyone else's needs before your own, anxious, panicked, or depressed feelings, that's another one, suicidal thoughts, disordered eating habits, these are things that can happen. They don't always, and not everybody would be able to relate to all of it. But some of us can relate to some of it. Disordered eating habits, problems with alcohol and or illicit drugs, promiscuity, this is kind of where we left off, at promiscuity. And or troubling memories about past abuse, moments of disassociation where you mentally space out for a while, difficulty trusting others, chronic pain in specific parts of your body, self-inflicted harm such as cutting or burning yourself, involvement in a relationship as an adult with someone who abuses you, and also abusing your own children. So these are things that can happen, don't always happen, but can happen. And promiscuity, you know, for some people who have been abused, and you know, I've read this. I was never promiscuous, and that's the whole issue. My whole sexual identity and the whole idea about my own sexuality was so screwed up because my parents were my dad was sexually abusing my mother, and watching their dysfunction, you know, and that whole fact that, you know, my dad was raping my mother, marital rape, which most people, you know, a lot of people like to excuse that away and just say, oh well, the husbands, you know, husbands and wives have needs and it's they're right, you know, and it's like no, no, it's not, because when the wife or the husband says no, they say no, they have a right to their own body, right? We have a right to our own body, and so you know, if there's health issues, and which there was, and and my dad would not allow my mother to go on birth control. And she was not allowed to have any more children after my brother, and she ended up popping out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more babies, right? Which only 2 of us survived. 3 died stillborn. So after my brother, who's 7 years older than me, my mom still had 5 children. Only 2 of us made it, and 3 died. So my dad had been forcing himself on her for years because she was told not to have any more children, and he would not allow her to be on birth control. And my sister argues with me on this, and she says, well, Mom could have got on birth control. There's no way that she couldn't. Thing is that my dad was really, she didn't have a car. She didn't have any way to get anywhere, you know what I mean? And even if she had been on birth control, you know what I mean? Like, if he found it, would he have thrown it away, or, you know what I mean? And really, people say, well, really it was her responsibility too. Really what her responsibility was that she should have got out of that marriage. Because any man who would rape you continually because he needs to get his needs met, or any woman who would rape, you know, anyone, right? This is incredibly wrong, and it's a serious issue in marriages, and people need to stop doing that, right? People have the right to their own bodies, and so when if the marriage is crumbling and you don't go get some marital help, and it could be for physical reasons, it could be for emotional issues, could be for many reasons why someone would withdraw, you know, from that intimacy, right? Mainly when your husband's battering you and abusing you in every way. Of course, you're not going to want to be intimate with them. You know what I mean? Of course, my mom would have pulled back from him because he was abusing her, right? And so, you know, she should have got out. Really, she had every opportunity to get out. But the whole issue is that my dad would not allow her to be on birth control, and was forcing himself on her. So, you know, watching this and growing up in this type of home really caused me to not want to have anything to do with sexual intimacy. You know, and really, you know, well, being abused as a child didn't help either sexually, right? Because at the age of 8, and who knows even before that, I have no idea, but I know that at 8 years old I was sexually molested by a sibling. And it really, that coupled with my parents' dysfunction, their whole sexual dysfunction, really made me not want to have anything to do with sex, you know, or intimacy, period, right? I didn't want anybody touching my body. I didn't like the fact that my body was turning into a prepubescent teenager. I did not like my body, period. I didn't like the fact that I was a woman. I did not like the fact that, you know, I could not identify with my feelings towards my own body or my own sexuality. So basically, I was just felt like a sexless being. You know what I mean? Because that's the only way I could deal with it, right? And so you know, guys would ask me out, and I was, you know, being interested in guys, which I knew I was. You know, it was always this idea that, hey, I like the idea of, you know, of having a guy be interested in me, but would I ever let them get close? No. And I mean, so promiscuity was not a problem for me. I was just like the farthest thing from it you could get. And so, but I know that people who have been sexually abused and whatnot, it can happen. It doesn't always happen that people would be promiscuous if they were abused as children, but are sexually abused or in any other way. But it can be an issue, and I know some people do go that route. Right, my friend did. She was abused. She was molested by one of her family members, and she went the opposite way. She was very promiscuous and very much even considered herself to be a nymphomaniac because that's just how she was. But whether that was because of the abuse she suffered or just something else, I don't know. Right? Excuse me, my voice is just not quite awake here yet. But yeah, promiscuity was not a problem with me because I had a serious issue and wouldn't let anybody get near me until, you know, much later. So, you know, that's the thing. It can happen, but it's harsh what happens when people grow up around that sexual dysfunction and you know, two parents, you know, when they love each other and then and the kids know that, and the kids know that their parents love each other and are so, you know, a team and a couple and really working as one in the family. It must be just so awesome to see that, because my parents never held each other. They never hugged each other. As a matter of fact, when they were in the same room, it was a problem, right? because at any time anything could happen, right? Because my mom was always felt that she had to defend herself. So if my dad came in the room, there could be, pots of coffee coming across the room, pots and pans coming across the room, dishes. My dad could become volatile at any time and decide he's going to start slapping my mom around. It was a nasty situation, you know what I mean? And in the middle of the night, they were quite often fighting, and that's because my dad was always trying to force himself on her. It's caused a whole lot of problems for the whole family, right? My older brothers would try to stop my dad and actually tried to protect my mom from my dad for many years. But then when they moved out, it became my job, right? And so I really didn't sleep well at night because I was always concerned that if I did sleep too soundly, I wouldn't hear my mom, screaming for help or whatever if my dad was in there bugging her and trying to force himself on her. And it's pretty sad, and she would just be at her wit's end, after year after year after year of that, right? And horrible. If you're dealing with this stuff, man, make sure that you get some help. Do not allow yourself to be abused, My mom had every opportunity to get out and didn't do it. And, all of her children, including especially the older siblings, told her that they would help her get a place. They were like, we'll get you a place, Mom. We you don't even have to pay for it. We'll all work. You can get out of this marriage. You don't have to stay in this, right? And because, my dad was abusing the kids too, right? So not just her. And the only reason I believe really one of the reasons she was abusing us, not the only reason, but one of them was because she was being abused, passing on the buck, you know what I mean? Everybody was treating everybody horribly in my family. So she had opportunities to get out, right? So it's very sad that people will allow themselves to stay in these relationships, right, and allow themselves to be abused. It's not right. And so don't do that if you're in that situation. Get yourself some help somehow, right? Troubling memories about past abuse. This is something that can happen to people who have been abused, and not everybody goes through this. I'm sure there's people out there who have been abused and were able to work through it somehow, maybe possibly had help in the past working through it, so the troubling memories just don't bother them. For me, up until 4 years ago, when I decided to make a commitment to stick around and fight this and stay alive and get some help, that was a huge issue for me, and it would send me into bouts of depression because I'd be remembering the abuse and remembering all the hurt and the horrors that was going on in my home, and the relationships between me and the parents and the children, and the fact that many of my siblings are gone, and our family was just kind of destroyed, and it's like, it was very troubling, you know what I mean? So I could hold down a job, no problem. Go to work, put a smile on my face, just that's what I was trained to do as a child. Put a smile on, the worst situations could be happening in our home, and we'd still have to go to school, and we'd still have to put a smile on our face, and face the world, right? And that's what most abused people have to do, right? And they're trained to do it as a child, right? So, especially if you grow up in that kind of dysfunction where it's just, abusive from day one. You'll just learn how to do that, right? So, but then I'd get home and I'd be like, man, this is horrible. You know what I mean? Sitting around just in my own, funk, my own blues, depression and whatnot, right? And 4 years ago when I began my healing journey, that really changed for me. You know what I mean? I don't sit around and do that anymore. And I still have periods of days that are better than others. I have some days that are definitely better than others. There's always some, there's a potential at any time to have a bad day. You know what I mean? But does that, 4 years ago, prior to my healing journey, I would have just allowed myself to continue to spiral down into a depression. But now I know, hey, I've got friends and they care. I've built up, really thank God for these people, you know what I mean, including, my good friend here sitting in the chat room, who are there for me, you know what I mean, and they do care. And so, if I'm having a hard day, I can just tell them, hey, it's a hard day. And they're there for me, you know what I mean? But, I had to reach out. People aren't going to know, right, unless it's not like we walk around with a sign on our forehead saying, oh, hi, I've been abused as a child and I really need some serious help. If you don't tell somebody many times, people don't know that you're having a hard time. People don't realize that you need that support, right? And so, I joined an online group support for child abuse survivors, and it was a great community, right? I'm not there anymore, and I just really didn't have time for it. You know what I mean? But the thing is that it was when I was actually on it, and part of it, it was great because I could talk to people who were, who had been through some of the same things I had, who had experienced and understood the pain involved, and the just what it takes to actually heal and hold on. You know what I mean? So it was a great support, and I would, what I suggested for other people. Well, if you're into that kind of thing, everybody's different. Not everybody would be interested in something like that. And so, then a counselor or therapist would be probably, could be another route. Whatever you decide should be the best thing for you. But ultimately, we are responsible for our healing journey, and so we have to know what the end result is. We have to know what we need from this. You know what I mean? We have to have clear direction if we're ever going to really heal from this stuff, and kind of have to know really that we are responsible and should be in charge of our healing journey. So that you can get that information just about everywhere. But I found a great website for that kind of stuff, and that's the Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, the ASCA. It's a Morris Center program. There's a workbook on there called Survivor to Thriver. The workbook is awesome. I think it's 120 pages long or something like that. We went through that like back on my shows a year ago almost, probably, or at least 8 months ago, going through that Survivor to Thriver workbook. That's some good information for people just starting out on your healing journey, because it gives you the whole rundown on whether or not you're even safe enough to begin a healing journey on your own, right? And there's support on that website. So there's so many good websites out there with good info on it, but this particular website, that's the ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse.org, the ASCA.org. They got some great information on there. They also have meetings in North America. They host meetings. I don't know about worldwide, but I know different cities in North America actually host the ASCA and host those meetings for child abuse survivors, adult survivors of child abuse. And that's a great website for people who, that Survivor to Thriver workbook is free. You can download it. You don't even have to download it. You can read it from their pages, right? And you can go on there and get some really good information on, how to begin your healing journey and what to expect from it, and really what is your role in it. It is our responsibility to have a role in our healing journey. And 4 years ago, I was sitting on the couch expecting somebody else to take away my pain, and that's why I wanted to take my own life, because I really was unaware of the fact that it was going to have to be me to do it. I was thinking somebody else would be able to do it for some reason. I was thinking, well, if a friend just loved me enough, and if I could just, somebody could just take my pain away, right? That's just what's into my mind, that's how it was going to have to work. And so I really didn't realize there was going to have to be me to do that, right? And so once I realized that, I got busy, right? Because I was like, oh, well, finally, here I clued into the fact that, hey, it's going to have to be me to learn how to love myself, to learn how to take care of myself. I was not given the information. I was not given the knowledge. I was not given, as a child, the information on how to cope and how to even stay alive, right? So I'm like, okay, boy, I'm going to have to get really, really busy here and try to figure this out, you know what I mean? And you don't have to do it alone, you know what I mean? I chose to do self-help, and that's mainly because I'm strong enough to do it, you know what I mean? But if you're not, then you need to make sure that you do whatever you need to do to get yourself to a good situation, you know what I mean, a healthy situation, because you certainly deserve it. We all do, right? And so I mean, we have to learn how to love ourselves. We have to learn how to nurture, right? If you were not nurtured as a child, you were not shown, any kind of love or care as a child, you really have to you have to be able to do that yourself. I had to be able to reach into my inner child and say, look, I love you. I know that you're wounded, and I know that you were seriously hurt. But that it's okay now, and we're going to make it, right? And really console myself and nurture myself. But see, I thought somebody else was going to be able to do that for me. So, once I figured it out, it was great, because I got to, really get going on my healing journey. So it is very important that we do that. We have to be responsible for our healing journey. Another situation, that can really, affect survivors of abuse, right? It's moments of dissociation. And that's where you mentally space out for a while. I don't know much about dissociation because I don't have dissociation. I really don't feel, maybe at a certain time in my life I might have been a bit dissociated, but I'm not now, and I don't recognize it within myself, right? So that for me is just all reading material. Like I don't relate to it. I don't understand it. You know what I mean? Because I don't relate to it. You know what I mean? I don't have dissociation, right? But I know for so many people that's such a huge issue. And that's just a whole other topic in itself. But you know what I mean? Eventually we may cover some of that, but not until I really study it up, because I have to, it's something that I don't know anything about how that would be, how that would feel, except for the fact that I know it would be very, very hard on a person to be dissociative, you know what I mean? Or to have dissociation, right? And some people who suffer mainly with child sexual abuse dissociate, and that's to protect themselves, because what's happening to them is so horrific that they go somewhere else. And I kind of think that something happened when I was sexually abused at 8 years old, because I can only remember bits and pieces of it. But I'm working through that. You know what I mean? Will I ever have the memories? Maybe not. And that's the whole issue. Sometimes we won't have a full the full memories of something because it was very stressful, and that's the dissociation, right? Where you actually, or repressing memories, right? So whether I've repressed those memories, or whether I dissociated, or even as it was suggested to me by someone, a very close friend, that possibly I couldn't see what was going on because I had something over my face, which is a very big possibility. Right, so that's the whole issue. Because with my eyes, I'm trying to see what happened. I know that I did see bits and pieces. You know what I mean? But it was dark. But I totally have these memories. Right. Well, that's harsh on kids, man. Let me tell you, and it's really harsh on adult survivors. And so, if you're not okay to work through that stuff, and you're a survivor, you make sure that you get some help. You know what I mean? Because I'm perfectly okay to work through it, but that does not mean that other people would be, right? I'm in a very stable mental state, right? But some people are not. And so, you have to know where you're at when you're working on this stuff, and make sure that if you're going to try to work on that kind of stuff, make sure that you're safe enough to do it. And you're in a safe enough place, and that you may need support, right? And there's nothing wrong with that at all, right? So whatever you have to do to make sure that you keep yourself safe when you're working on things like trying to remember past abuse and trying to put it, in certain order in a certain time frame, or just trying to get some validation for it, make sure that you're safe enough to do that. You know what I mean? And if you're not, get some help, because the shame doesn't belong to us. So we have no shame in this. But see, the sad thing is that survivors take on the shame of being abused, right? Whatever way they were abused. The shame doesn't belong to us. And once I figured that out, it was very freeing to me, because I realized that, hey, the shame does not even belong to me. It belongs to the abusers. It belongs to my parents. Shame on them. The shame is not mine. I don't carry it. I don't carry that shame anymore, right? It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people that hurt me. It belongs to my sibling who sexually abused me. That's where the shame goes. So shame on them, not shame on me. I don't carry that shame, and it's such a freeing thing to not carry that shame. I'm happy that I don't carry that shame, and I hope that you won't either, because the abusers do what they do, and it's a choice. They do what they do because they want to do it. So the shame lies on them, right? That's where the shame goes, right? Difficulty trusting others is another one, trust issues. And trust issues are always an issue, and they always will be, because everyone has a potential to hurt everyone, right? Anyone can hurt anyone at any time. I can hurt somebody, right? Meaning to, or maybe possibly on accident, right? Maybe not even meaning to, right? Sometimes on purpose, sometimes not. Everyone has the capability of hurting someone. That's the whole issue. We have to be really careful so that we don't hurt people. And then if we do, we need to apologize and make it right. Do whatever we can to make it right, because people do hurt people. So if we're going to not trust people because we're afraid of getting hurt, then we may as well just go lock ourselves away in a closet and sit there until we die. Because honest to God, how are we going to ever have a good life if we don't, just say, okay, I could get hurt in this relationship, but I'm going for it anyway. You know what I mean? Especially when the person's not really abusive and it looks like this person cares about you. But, so many times people will shut themselves away and they will not open their hearts to anyone because they have a difficulty trusting others. They're so afraid of being hurt. And me, what I do is I'm just really careful with my relationships. And the minute somebody turns abusive on me, if they don't look like they're going to either change their behavior or apologize or something, then they're out of my life. They're just like that. I have no problem cutting people off. And that's because, hey, I'm going to be nice. And if I do something that hurts somebody, and I would hope that they would bring it to my attention. And that then I could have the opportunity to apologize. You know what I mean? Because sometimes things happen and we don't do that stuff on purpose, right? And so neither do they. So, we are going to get hurt. But the thing is that it's all, abuse is an issue. You don't want to be re-victimized, right? So you do have to know where your boundaries are, and you have to set boundaries, right? Well, we'll have to pick this up again tomorrow. We'll finish this off tomorrow, 5:30, same time, changing the show time to 5:30 in the morning just because I have to. Sadly enough, it's a little bit early, but that's all right. So we'll finish this article up, and then we'll start on the next one on next week on Monday. So thanks, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it. I'll be back on tomorrow and then tomorrow night. And if you need something, you can leave me a message here on Blog Talk Radio or Facebook or whatnot, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Whatever you do, make sure that you don't ever give up. That's all I'm saying. Never, ever give up. It's not an option. You have to keep going forward. We have to keep going forward. I have to keep going forward, right? And I just keep reaching out, right? That was the best thing I could have ever done. I'm so glad I reached out because when I started reaching out, all these hands started reaching back to me. Right, I had no idea that would happen. Right, I had no idea. I thought I was in this to the end by myself, and let me tell you, that was a sad thought. And so, make sure that you do reach out, at some point and get some help. Right, don't suffer in this in sadness and silence. Right, so take really good care of yourselves, everybody. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye bye.